Hello, BookTube, and welcome to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, and this week we have been concentrating on the Greeks because I went a little Roman happy. And yesterday we did Thucydides, and if you're going to talk about Thucydides, then you know already who today's video is going to be about, and that's Herodotus, the so-called father of history. Also called by his detractors, of which he's had many, including some famous people, including Plutarch, another figure we've seen on this Daily Penguin. The father of lies, he's often called that as well. This Penguin Classic, the older Penguin Classic, is the Aubrey de Selincourt translation, who also is responsible for some wonderful translations, including The War with Hannibal by Livy. And his method of translating books was, in my opinion, a really good one, provided you're capable of doing it. But the number of people who are capable is so small anymore, I guess maybe it has ever been so small. And that is to take a certain chunk of the book, study it in the original language, read it, maybe take some notes, and then get up from your table and walk around, go outside, walk the dog, go and have lunch with friends, maybe see a show. With that chunk of what you read fermenting in your mind, and then come back to your table and, without looking at the work again, write down that chunk. And you'll check it against the specifics later on, but what you want to do is capture the essence in considered, thoughtful prose. And Aubrey de Selincourt is fantastic at that. He's just fantastic at doing that. The end result, the end translating results, are wonderful. Just wonderful, whether it's in Latin with Livy or in Greek with Herodotus. And as a result, the Aubrey de Selincourt Herodotus is a performance in its own right. It really is like sitting down and listening to someone talk. And that is the style of Herodotus, and that is why so many stringent critics have had poor opinions of him, and the same reason they've had poor opinions of Livy, because Herodotus was omnivorously curious about everything. His main subject, the main big subject, if you want to call it that, in his histories, is the scattered but free, largely free, in city-states of Greece versus the giant monolith of Persia, and that lends itself to an us versus them, good versus evil narrative of the type that later historians would do. But Herodotus was never interested in that, and he grew up on the fringes of that Persian world, so he knew that it wasn't just a giant monolith of evil. And so his book teems with personalities. It teems with fantastic images and moments and vignettes and plot lines that go nowhere they have no purpose other than just to exhaust Herodotus's interest. He chases after every digression because it interests him. He's universally interested in things, and conveys that really, really well, especially in the Aubrey de Selincourt translation. But we're going to talk about another translation as well. And their Oxford World Classics translation is also fairly good. I think a little weightier, a little harder to get into right away. But Herodotus is that style of a historian, and he tells you that outright. He's very good at all throughout the course of this book saying, well, there's a story about so-and-so, and I've read this version, and I've read this other version that contradicts it in some ways, and I've also talked to people who come from a tradition or who know about it themselves, or maybe are descended from people who know about it themselves, and I'm just going to lay all these things out, and here's what I think about some of them, and this makes a great story, and let's tell it anyway. There's an attitude towards what we now consider to be responsible professional history writing that is not here. It has not. Herodotus was, as far as we know, the first person to ever try this sort of thing, and he has no interest in that attitude at all. He's curious to know what really happened, but he's also curious to know why people say other things happen. It makes for a slightly formless but incredibly engrossing reading experience, in a way, in a voice, in a personality that his other bookend, the other figure that is always mentioned in tandem with him, Thucydides, never even approaches. Never even approaches. Part of that might have to do with differences in personality. Part of it also has to do with distance from the material. Thucydides was directly involved in his material, and Herodotus largely was not. In fact, the extent to which he was directly involved is keenly debated. Did he actually even travel to the places that he says he did, or did he mainly write about what he found in other books? If you're like me, when you read this book, even in English, you're not going to care. After a little while, after a few pages, a few dozen pages, you're not going to care. That's not the point of this book. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And Herodotus has come with me all over the world when Thucydides stayed at home. Herodotus has been my companion in rainy nights in India. He's been my companion in the lower slopes of the Himalayas. He's been my companion far out at sea, in places, as I often reminded myself, in places that he never even dreamt existed, as well as in places that he knew existed. I am pretty sure that I am the only booktuber who has cracked open a copy of Herodotus inside one of the great pyramids of Giza. and Herodotus is fascinated by Egypt, by an Egypt that was ancient even in his day. And there's a reason why this book has been my companion everywhere and Thucydides has not, because this is just essential to me, absolutely essential as Livy. So my old Penguin Classic mass market paperback has been reinforced a million times and read many, many times. But in more recent years, there has been a Penguin Classic Deluxe edition of Herodotus, and there's a part of me that wishes that if Penguin Classics was going to spring for a beautiful deluxe edition, these are the ones that have the deckled edges and the French flaps, the better binding, the new illustration on the cover. There's a part of me that wishes that if they were going to spring, they should have Herodotus as a deluxe edition. They absolutely should. They should have Livy as a deluxe edition too. But if they're going to spring for it, there was a part of me that kind of wished it would be Aubrey de Selincourt, since that's a translation that I have so much affection for. But they didn't do that. Instead, they went with what was then a much newer translation by Tom Holland. Not the 5-pack-a-day tobacco addict who plays Spider-Man, but the classicist Tom Holland, who wrote Rubicon, among other things. This is his Herodotus. And it's very good. It's very interesting. This is a beautiful, beautiful edition. I couldn't do without both of them. I want both of them in my collection. I think I have the Oxford as well. This is a little bit of a heartbreak for me because the back cover blurbs for this Penguin Classic are Paul Cartledge, who wrote the introduction, a blurb from The Economist, and a snippet from Edith Hall's review in the Times Literary Supplement in the TLS. And that's fine. They're great blurbs, but on the pub sheet for the book, which one blurb didn't make it onto the cover. One blurb was by me. The pub sheet has a blurb from the literary journal, the online literary journal called The Quarterly Conversation. That is, Holland's book is a performance of its own, full of gusto and flair, and in that way it beats its predecessors. This is the Herodotus the pub man, taking your elbow to tell you stories about the dastardly yet fascinating tyrants of the Near East and the miraculous fables attending them. And that and the Paul Cartledge and the Edith Hall are on the pub sheet, but it didn't make it onto the book. Can you imagine how insufferably happy I would be if a blurb of mine, even unnamed, got onto a Penguin Classic of Herodotus? Oh my God, can you imagine how happy I would be? It's just, it came that close. It came very close. And I would ordinarily, at this point, tell you that I will link to that review. I would love to do that because it was a very long and very exhaustive review. It wasn't an 800-word thing. I went on at great length, comparing passage by passage and philosophy by philosophy, Holland's translation with others, including the de Selincourt, for the Quarterly Conversation. And to the best of my ability, in fact, I'll be throwing it on the mercy of the court here, to the best of my ability, as the best I've been able to find out, the Quarterly Conversation is gone and never archived any of its work. I cannot find any trace of that essay. And I'm pretty sure that after 10 years, I don't have a copy of whatever I sent. I'm pretty sure that I would hate to think that Herodotus review, the one quoted in that pub sheet, is just plain gone. I would hate to think that. Along with all the other stuff I wrote for the Quarterly Conversation, there were some others, some long, relatively contemporary poetry reviews that I would like to have. But I don't think I do. I don't think I still have raw copies of my own in document form. I would have to copy it off that site, and it never occurred to me that the site would just disappear. All the less so because Open Letters Monthly, the online literary journal where I was the managing editor for 10 years, likewise underwent a massive housekeeping, but we conscientiously saved and preserved all of the work that was on that site so that its writers can go and get it and point to it. And I can't believe that the Quarterly Conversation wouldn't have done the same thing, but it's beating me. So if you can find it, if you can find where the Quarterly Conversation has gone in its archives, where that piece of mine on Herodotus might have gone, I would love it. And you could point that to me. But that is your That is your Daily Penguin. It's 2 different Penguin classics of Herodotus, the histories of Herodotus. It's a very, very strong recommendation, but you have to let Herodotus have his way. You can't go in expecting anything like our modern view of history, and you can't go in wanting him to hurry. You've got to be willing to go along with whatever he wants to talk about. If you are, he will enchant you. I feel certain of it. And that is, it's absolutely necessary. It was necessary to get in Herodotus since we spent time with Thucydides. So we will move on. I think it's what, Tuesday? I think we'll stick with the Greeks for the rest of the week, and then we'll start jumping all around in the ancient world. So we still have a lot of the ancient world to go. But today's ancient world could not be a stronger recommendation. Oh my. Herodotus is wonderful. I go back to him for restitution. He restores me. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.